This week, I was absolutely delighted to interview Dr. Kahn. Dr. Kahn is the Head of Language Studies at the University of Sussex and has a fascinating role as the Chair of the Academic Misconduct Panel. Now, Dr. Kahn discusses the difference between plagiarism and personation, explains how AI is really changing the way that they have to assess their students within the university, and how technology and AI is really limiting students' ability to think critically about their work. Now, Dr. Kahn is an absolute expert within this area. It's a fascinating listen. I really hope you enjoy it. So, Aaron, as you know, this YouTube channel is about AI within education. Before AI existed, as chair of that misconduct panel, what kind of cases were you looking at?
The traditional forms of misconduct are plagiarism, where somebody uses somebody else's words and ideas in their work without properly referencing, or collusion, where two or more students work together when they're not supposed to work together. There was personation, which is when somebody else does the work for you. Traditionally, it used to be somebody sneaking into an exam hall and maybe doing the exam for you, or buying an essay on an essay mill. So submitting work that you didn't, that somebody else did for you. And then in the sciences, there's fabrication of results, where they pass off information that they submit for assessment that they created, that they didn't actually get as a result of experiments. So those are the more traditional forms of misconduct that we used to see. With AI, it has changed things in quite a lot of ways. The types of misconduct and how students approach misconduct and why they commit misconduct, these have all changed quite drastically.
And you were saying kind of before we had this call that actually AI isn't necessarily plagiarism. So can you kind of explain kind of the differences between the two?
Yeah, so again, plagiarism is if you're writing an essay, for example, and you take somebody else's words and ideas and you put them in your work without properly referencing them, without giving credit to who was the creator of these works or these ideas and words, then that's plagiarism. So it might be that somebody copies something from a book and puts it in, but doesn't put quotation marks around it, doesn't give a reference. So it's fine to use someone else's words and ideas in your essay, but you've just got to give proper credit.
So AI then, how does that fit into the misconduct? What policy does that now kind of sit under within the university?
Normally we call it personation, where somebody else does the work for you. So in this case, it's not a human being, it's a machine learning tool that does the work for you. So I think it's important to remember that the one essential basic principle of assessments is that when you submit an assessment, there's an implied admission on this part of the student that what they're submitting is 100% their own work, unless they've properly referenced somebody else's words and ideas. So if you use AI to write your essay for you, to do parts of the essay, and you're not given explicit permission to do so, then that means that you haven't done the work. Somebody else, in this case, it's a machine, again, not a person, has done the work for you. We call that personation. Other institutions might call it something different, but that's the main type of misconduct that we see that AI is involved with. We also have altered our definition of fabrication of results. So I said earlier that that's traditionally used for people in the sciences, for example, who have results from some type of experiment, and they fabricate those results to fit their needs. AI, one of the things that we might be getting into in this discussion as well, one of the hallmarks of AI, or at least up until now, because we have to remember that it's constantly learning, it's constantly looking to improve itself, is that AI has not been very good at references. It's not been very good at putting things within quotation marks. So we have instructed people to look at that, to lecturers and people who are marking essays, to look at these and say that if a student has a reference, which sometimes might just be in brackets, a random surname and a year with nothing quoted, and then there's nothing in a bibliography that matches that reference, then that is fabrication of results. So now we've looked into altering the definition of that, and often students who've used AI in their assessments when they're not allowed to, that's been one of the results.
So that's a very proactive way of managing it, seeing how quickly the AI tools are learning, and then the university is changing accordingly. Is there anything I say you can do or we can do within education to be ahead of the changes there, or do we have to just see what happens and react as quickly as possible?
I think it's I think it's seeing what happens and having to react as soon as possible. We've tried to preempt a lot of this by making overarching principles and guidelines within assessments to say that you cannot use AI in any form of contributory assessment without express permission within the rubric of that assessment. So if a student is caught is found to have used AI in an assessment where that wasn't part of the instructions, then they are liable for being accused of academic misconduct.
So has your workload kind of escalated over the last couple of years within that role you have at the university?
I think so. I don't know the statistics of it, but it feels like if the overall numbers haven't increased drastically, it's the type of misconduct that's increased, which is the use of AI.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is something. This is something. So personation, where somebody else does the work for you, wasn't a very common form of misconduct in the past. It was almost exclusively plagiarism and collusion. Whereas now, even when essay mills started to become more prominent, that was kind of easy to catch because a student would end up submitting something that was quite a few levels above the knowledge that they were supposed to have on that subject, particularly in languages, which I teach. If somebody who's in a beginner's level class then all of a sudden submits something that was much more sophisticated grammatically, then that raises suspicions.
You're obviously an expert within this world. As the kind of a standard teacher, which I am in a secondary school, what kind of tricks are there to spot a student using AI, or do you think we are going to have to start using software to counteract it?
Some of the hallmarks, some of the typical things that we see with AI are quite robotic language. It doesn't seem quite like a human being wrote it. Things that are vague and avoid specific details. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, the references. If you have an essay, for example, and you require students to have references, secondary sources that they're looking at, and if those don't appear, that's often a sign. And AI, at least now, it's still often incorrect. The information isn't always correct because it harvests information from what's on the internet, and the internet can have vastly conflicting information about a certain topic.
How do you think you could mitigate some of this with assessments that you're using rather than just asking students for essays, etc.? What other ways are you looking at to really see if the student understands the knowledge?
Well, in our language classes, for example, we've gone back to having in-class assessments. So students have to actually handwrite their assessments in front of us. So everybody has access to the same tools, which is basically, in this case, just what's in their head as opposed to a dictionary or the internet. But it's not easy because the vast majority of assessments now throughout the Western world are submitted online. So students do them at home. Often exams now are still done at home online. We don't really have many exam halls anymore where students come in and fill them and do. Now that's a difference than what you would have in secondary school, where GCSEs and A levels are still regulated to that way. But I think we're trying to go back to that, to having class assessments as much as we can.
Do the students ever think that that's a backward way of assessment? And therefore, what conversations do you get into about what integrity actually means when it comes to academia?
It's a good question because we talk about academic misconduct, but academic misconduct falls under this umbrella concept of academic integrity, and that's the term that we use. And I've been encouraging my colleagues as much as possible to have an open discussion with students in class, maybe the first meeting of class, and to talk about AI and talk about the fact that from a degree perspective, we encourage students to take ownership of what they study, to take ownership of the degree that they've chosen to come and study and that they're paying for. And do they really want to finish 3 or 4 years of study, get handed a degree, knowing that they didn't write that work, they didn't earn it, they had a lot of help from someone else. And in the case of what I teach, a language, which is a skill, and if you go out and try and get a job, saying, oh, I speak Spanish, I have a degree in Spanish, but you can't speak Spanish because a machine did all that work for you, well, then you're going to be left out high and dry. So we try to have a frank discussion about integrity. And I think most students respond really well to that.
So it's really the ownership of the work and kind of loving the subject, as opposed to, it doesn't matter how you assess them. If they love the subject, you want to set them up for a fabulous career, and saying that maybe AI is not the way to be successful when you leave university.
Yeah, and we also have a lot of discussions about time management, because frankly, what happens, most people I've found, and again, I don't have empirical evidence to back this up, this is just my experience, but most people, when they're in front of a panel and I ask them, why did you do this? Did you think you were going to get caught? A lot of the response is, I was stressed. It was the last minute. I didn't know what to do. We also have a duty of care to our international students who don't speak English as a first language, and often students who are sometimes thousands of miles away from home in particularly stressful situations. They're not writing in their own language. And I did a lot of work in Spanish. I know what it's like. It takes sometimes double the time as the person who speaks that language as a first language to do the work and to get it correct. And if you have deadlines coming up and you're thousands of miles from home, and let's not forget that a lot of this has come about not that long after COVID, and not that long after we had thousands of international students that couldn't go home, and their families were facing COVID as well. So we kind of had this perfect storm of this advance in technology and people recovering from this global epidemic. And it seems like the easy option, but what we're trying to do is have a frank and open discussion, because it's there to stay. It's part of the future.
Do you actually think, because I was just thinking out loud here, that because we started using Zoom and all these kind of technologies to interact with students, do you think that escalated the use of AI? Because suddenly we all thought we were some kind of tech gurus because we could have online conversations with someone from the other side of the world.
Yeah, I think it possibly could have escalated it. Like I said, I think in very short time, in the last 5 years or so, we've seen quite an advance of technology. Before COVID, I'd never heard of Zoom. I'd never heard of Teams. I only used Skype to make calls like this. And then all of a sudden you could do it on WhatsApp. You could do it on FaceTime. You could do it on all these different devices. So it very well could have. And now that something like generative AI is so accessible to everybody, if you do a simple Google search, for example, the first thing that comes up is an AI response to your
Gemini, which is incredible. Okay, so using the English as a second language, just to move on to my next question. So do you think AI can support students with maybe kind of special educational needs, students that you need to make adjustments for? Do you see any positives on how AI can really support academia?
I think there are a lot of positives there, and I think that it's got a bad rap from the academic side of things, people who mark essays and who are examiners. However, there are a lot of positives. I think it can really help people structuring ideas. It can help with speedy searches of things. If you're looking for information that in the past you might have had to done a lot of different searches online or gone to a library, that information is at your fingertips, so it can save a lot of time. I think particularly, yes, with people with different learning challenges and difficulties that they might face, different people will find different uses of it. And I think that can all be very positive. The thing from an academic perspective, I think that we need to emphasize, however, is that there's a difference between using AI in your bedroom doing a Google search, or if you're creating an image using AI, or you're using AI to help you write your poem or write a love letter or something like that. That's different than using AI with a submitted piece of work that you're trying to get an academic reward for. That there's a difference. So even if your university lecturer says, oh, I use AI to help me find resources, that doesn't mean you can use AI on your essay, because you're trying to get an academic reward. You're trying to demonstrate that you've achieved within this subject area and that you've gained this knowledge, and you have these marks to demonstrate that. So that there is that difference, and that's another difference with my colleagues, that I say we need to emphasize this difference, that there is a gray area there because everybody has access to this stuff.
So I will have students saying to me, I don't need to spell because I got spell check on Microsoft Word, or I don't need to add up because I've got a calculator. You would love, I guess, all your students to be phenomenal at referencing, know how to use an inside, like a library, where to go for reference books and this, that, and the other. And AI could possibly leapfrog that skill. It's a difficult conversation when I have it with my students, who are obviously a lot younger, because there is a point that they're carrying a calculator in their pocket. Why do they need the skill to be able to understand how a library works if, for example, when AI gets much more sophisticated and more accurate, they can bypass that skill? What's the importance of having that kind of that library skill?
Well, I suppose the different skills will have different levels of importance, and you're right. It's when I was doing algebra and calculus in school, I used a calculator the whole time because we were allowed to, we were told to. It made things a lot easier. When I think of how I do research now compared to how my professors did research in the 70s and 80s, when everything was still on a typewriter, and it just took an immense amount more time. With the library, I still think it's important to know how to search for proper sources, as opposed to, and this is something where if you're only working online, it can be really difficult to determine what's an acceptable source for an academic paper, because anybody can put anything on the internet. That doesn't mean that it's right. Whereas if you're accessing an academic journal that's properly edited, that happens to also be online, that's okay. So I think that there are some traditionalists with research and with library skills that think everybody should have to know how to read a card catalog and go and find a book in a library. That's not as important anymore, I don't think. However, it is important for students to be able to recognize the difference between these sources. When you talk about spelling and grammar, for example, like you mentioned, I also think that it's incredibly important to know these skills, know how to do them yourself. But then if you have a piece of technology that can aid you in that, such as spell check, then that can be a plus. But if you don't know why the computer's telling you to use THERE instead of THEIR, if you don't understand that, then you've missed the point.
I've got this real dilemma at the moment. We've just had to change all our clocks in the exam hall from analog clocks to digital clocks, because I would say 70% of the students can't read an analog clock. And these are some of them are 8s and 9 GCSE students that have never had an analog clock on their wrist or on the walls.
Yeah.
So policy. Can we just talk about policy for a bit? Because this is so fast moving at the moment. We used to update policies every year. January the 1st, we change the date, and we might change a couple of things that have happened. How on earth are you keeping up to date with policy, so everyone is kind of working from the same hymn sheet when it comes to kind of grading work and the support you're giving to students?
It did change. I remember January 2023 was the first time that the use of AI was mentioned in our misconduct policy, our academic integrity policies. It may have been earlier. That's just the first time I remember seeing it, which we all kind of took a sigh of relief, thinking, okay, great. It's now that it's mentioned specifically in the policies and in the guidelines. But I think if we tried to emphasize the general principle that was always there, that when you submit a piece of work, you're admitting, you're swearing that it's your work and that no one else did it. And it's really just a reapplication of that principle. There have been all sorts of different guidelines about how to teach the use of AI, when it's acceptable, when it's unacceptable. But when it comes to submitting something for an assessment, that really hasn't changed. That general principle hasn't changed.
Are you actively now teaching students how to use AI? Because I guess it's just another language form. Are you kind of dedicating some of your time each week? You've got the academic lessons. Do they have to have a certain understanding of what AI is as part of everybody's learning at the university?
There are no policies that say that everybody has to teach it. We don't do in a lot of that in languages because it's just a very practical skill anyway. So when we're in class, there are no specific lessons about using AI, but we address the topic just to make sure that people understand it. There might be other I know that there are other disciplines within the university that use AI a lot more frequently, and it's more embedded and integrated into their curriculum. And with those people, because again, when I'm chair of Misconduct Panel, it could be anybody from in any discipline in the university. So I do see how they do it in engineering and informatics and law, and so those subject areas, probably more so than most humanities subjects, are going to integrate the use of AI. And my feedback is always just please make it very clear in the assessment rubric when you're allowed to use it and when you're not. Because some of the modules might specifically be on the use of AI now, where part of the assessment is to use AI. And I think, again, as long as it's clear what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, then that makes it much easier for everybody.
So I'm leaving a big question to the end now.
Okay.
All my colleagues, well, I say all of them, quite a lot of them are terrified about losing their jobs, that they are now insignificant as an educator with X amount of years of experience. How are your colleagues, do you think they're generally going towards AI, or are they a little bit scared of AI? And what do you think the future holds for teachers across the whole spectrum of age groups?
I think the reaction to AI amongst my colleagues is probably as mixed as it is anywhere else in the world. So some people have embraced it and use it. Some people haven't. Some people are afraid of it. I would like to think that there will always be a place for the human in teaching, in education, because there's so much about being human that the machine won't be able to get. There's a lot about empathy. There's a lot about recognizing emotions within the classroom. And those are subtle things. As you know, you can tell when you're teaching a class, you can tell within 5 minutes if people are getting bored. So when I give a lecture, if it's an hour,
my lessons probably.
Yeah. When I give an hour lecture, I try to insert a joke every 10 minutes just to keep their attention. And those are things that I can notice out of the corner of my eye based on body language. And these are all things that maybe AI one day will be able to recognize, but I still see so much of human critical thinking that's necessary in education that I just don't think a machine will be able to replicate. I say that, who knows, but that's my hope.
So with the critical thinking, that was going to be my last question, but I'll make this my last question. Critical thinking. Now, do you think technology, I'm going to use it, do you think it can dumb down the students? And I'm specific, it was the critical thinking word that's kind of sparked it off my head. Do you feel that they lack certain skills now because they're relying on technology far too much?
Yeah, I guess I'll go out on a limb here and say I think that it has affected things. I think it's affected attention spans, for example. I've noticed that students now who are in their late teens and early 20s do seem to be more addicted to technology, in a sense that they don't like turning their phones off. They don't like that there seems to be some kind of withdrawal. But also, for example, we do a lot of oral presentations in languages. And we do an oral interpreting exam, which is really difficult. It takes a lot of concentration. And they were always 10 minutes long. We used to be able to do it 18, 20 years ago. The students would be able to do it quite well. Now it just seems like it's more of a chore. It's more of an effort for them. And I think that attention span has a lot to do with that. Critical thinking skills, I think students are still very capable of learning these critical thinking skills and problem solving skills. I just don't know how much they're being emphasized now, and how much maybe even the teachers and the lecturers are relying on them using technology to not have to do that. But in disciplines such as literature, such as science, such as really anything that you might do at university, those critical thinking skills are essential for moving forward and progressing, because it's not just about learning information and producing it in an exam. At degree level, you're intended to be progressing forward towards and using previous knowledge and progressing forward towards a degree to give you some kind of professional qualification, hopefully.
So do you think the future's bright with academics? I mean, only this week we had University at Canterbury budding up now with Greenwich University to create one big super university. Obviously, they're finding it hard to run the universities financially, etc. What do you see the kind of the future? And is AI, is that one of the reasons, or are there kind of government policies? Was it coming anyway because the prices are going up and the value of it seems to be a bit mixed in the media at the moment? So what's the future? And do you think AI has kind of an impact within the future of both of our jobs?
I think that the current economic crises that universities are facing, I don't think it really has anything to do with AI. I think it has to do with the funding models. The fact that when fees were tripled in 2012, they haven't really gone up more than £500 for a year of study in the last 13 years. So I think that was one of the main issues with the current financial crisis. I think fewer students are going to university, so that's another issue. I hope that AI will have a positive role. I sincerely hope that it doesn't replace the human, like I said in this, but you never know. I think when organizations are facing a financial crisis, cutting pay is often the first thing that they try to go for. So if they can do that and bringing in AI, I think to the detriment of students, that would happen to the detriment of the educational institutions in general. So I'm hoping not, but you never know.
Well, I hope that the people watching this, whether they're teachers, students, or whoever, have got the attention span to watch for the 29 minutes that we've been on this. I know things like YouTube Shorts and the data now around Facebook and everything is just getting shorter and shorter. I still like an album. I know students like to listen to the first 20 seconds of each song. So maybe it's an age thing. Dr. Kahn, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated. Your expertise is so important to the conversation. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much.